Story 1. The House by the Pond and the Strange Sounds. It was the autumn of 2022. In a small lakeside town in Michigan, where cold winds carried moisture from the lake inland. Sarah's family, consisting of her husband Tom, and their young daughter Lily, 6 years old, had just moved into an older, slightly more spacious house, isolated with a large pond directly behind it. The house looked ordinary, a bit rundown with faded paint and an overgrown garden, but it possessed a strange antique, silent charm. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, often experienced work stress, and she had also just gone through a mild postpartum depression after Lily's birth. She tended to worry excessively, and this new home, while initially offering a sense of peace, also made her feel strangely isolated. From the very first nights, Sarah had begun to hear strange sounds from the pond behind the house. Sounds like fish jumping repeatedly on the water's surface at night. Very clear, but when she shined a light out, she saw nothing. The water's surface was calm, without a ripple. She told Tom, who just laughed and said it was probably just large fish or other animals. But Sarah remained uneasy. Every night, that sound would echo again, repeatedly, making it difficult for her to sleep. She felt an unusual presence from that pond, something abnormal lurking beneath the dark water. The first few days passed in terrifying silence, except for the sounds from the pond. Sarah spent her time taking care of Lily, painting, trying to adapt to her new life. But then, other strange things began to appear, very small, very subtle, but enough to catch her attention. Occasionally, when she was alone in the living room, she would hear very faint whispers, like someone talking in another room. But when she went to check, everything would be silent. Then one night, as the whole family was fast asleep, there was a very loud thump on the roof, as if someone had thrown a large stone at it. Both Sarah and Tom woke up startled. Tom turned on his flashlight, shone it out the window, but saw nothing. It was pitch black outside, and only the wind whistled through the tree branches. Tom tried to reassure Sarah, saying it was probably a falling branch, or some animal. But Sarah had a bad feeling. Every night, that sound would repeat, not just once, but many times, as if someone was deliberately throwing stones at the roof. The Miller family all had trouble sleeping, especially Sarah. She began to see dark shadows flitting past the corner of her eye, especially when she walked down the dark hallway, or when she was alone in the living room. She would spin around, but there was nothing, just the deafening silence and the old walls. The initial signs gradually became clearer and more terrifying. Sarah began to frequently see dark shadows flitting past the corner of her eye, especially when she walked down the dark hallway, or when she was alone in the living room. She would spin around, but there was nothing, just the deafening silence and the old walls. Once, she was making coffee in the kitchen, when she suddenly heard a very clear whisper, as if someone was calling her name. Sarah. She dropped the cup, her heart pounding like a drum. She looked around. No one was there. Only the wind whistling through the slightly open window. Objects in the house also began to move inexplicably. A painting hanging on the bedroom wall suddenly fell to the floor, for no reason. Sarah stood frozen, looking at the painting lying askew on the floor, and felt a chill run down her spine. She began to sleep very little. The terrifying dreams continued to torment her, becoming clearer and clearer. She clearly saw the face of a woman, long, soaking wet hair, a pale face, dark, lifeless eyes, and a grotesque, distorted smile, emerging from the pond behind the house, moving straight towards her. She woke up, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, and it took a long time for her to fall back asleep. Sarah began to doubt herself, and doubt everything she was experiencing. The tension reached its peak when Sarah began to see even more terrifying things. One evening, as she was sitting in her study painting, she suddenly felt an icy chill descend, much colder than the room's temperature. The window was closed tightly, yet she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck, as if someone was standing right behind her. Sarah got goosebumps all over, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. She spun around, but saw nothing. However, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. She felt a very clear presence, a gloomy, heavy energy enveloping her. Suddenly, the paintbrush in her hand fell to the floor, and the paintings on the table moved on their own, as if someone was deliberately disarranging them. Sarah screamed in terror and tried to run out of the room. But as soon as she touched the doorknob, she felt a cold, clammy hand grasp her wrist tightly. She looked down and saw a pale, bony hand with long and sharp fingernails. Sarah screamed again, trying to pull her hand free, but couldn't. She felt an icy current pass through her body, as if something was trying to possess her, to enter her. She felt herself losing control, her body no longer hers. The fear prompted Sarah to investigate the history of the house and the pond behind it. She had vaguely heard from neighbors about a tragic story that happened here a long time ago, but no one spoke clearly. She began searching for information, rummaging through old books, old newspaper articles at the local library. Finally, she found an old, yellowed newspaper article, reporting on a mysterious disappearance that occurred in the 1950s. A woman named Abigail Smith, who lived in this house, had disappeared mysteriously, leaving no trace. The article stated that Abigail was a beautiful woman, but had a tragic fate. She was abused by her husband, and often confined in the house. She had an extreme fear of water, especially the pond behind the house, where she believed an evil spirit was haunting. The article concluded with the hypothesis that Abigail might have committed suicide by jumping into the pond, or was murdered by her husband and her body thrown into it. Along with that article, Sarah also found an old, rotting journal, discovered beneath the floorboards in the old bedroom of the house. The journal was written in shaky handwriting, but it was clearly Abigail's. The last entries in the journal recounted Abigail's extreme suffering, her husband's torment, and the nights she heard calls from the pond, the calls of something waiting for her. The last page had only one sentence written in trembling handwriting. "They will never leave me alone. They want me to be a part of this place, forever." As Sarah read that, an icy chill ran down her spine, and she felt as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, and saw a female figure, long, soaking wet hair, a pale face, dark, lifeless eyes, and a grotesque, distorted smile, standing right in the middle of the room, staring directly at her. It was Abigail, the spirit of the woman who had died in that pond. Abigail said not a word, just slowly approached Sarah, her lifeless eyes never leaving her. Sarah backed away step by step, trying to get out of the room. She felt an icy current pierce through her, as if something was trying to possess her, to enter her. The extreme fear made her lose her reason. She felt Abigail's voice echoing in her head. "You have come. You will not escape me. You will be mine, forever." Sarah knew that Abigail's spirit had been trapped in the pond, and she had found a way to escape, by haunting this house, and seeking a new victim to possess. The sounds of fish jumping, the stones thrown at the roof, all were signs of Abigail's torment. She wanted to drag Sarah down. She wanted her to also become a part of that deadly pond. Sarah tried to resist, but she felt her body no longer obeying her. Abigail's ghost lunged at her, and Sarah felt an extreme pain, as if thousands of needles were piercing her body. She saw Abigail's reflection in her own eyes, dark, lifeless eyes, and a distorted smile. Just then, Tom and Lily, hearing Sarah's scream, ran into the room. As soon as Tom entered, Abigail's ghost suddenly vanished. Sarah collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. Tom and Lily rushed to her side worriedly, asking if she was all right. Sarah couldn't say a word, only hugged her daughter tightly, and sobbed uncontrollably. Sarah's family immediately left that house. They never returned there again. But the haunting still wouldn't release Sarah. Every night, she still heard the sounds of fish jumping from the pond, the stones thrown at the roof, and dreams of Abigail with soaking wet hair. A pale face, lifeless eyes continued to haunt her. She knew that Abigail's spirit was still there, trapped in pain and madness, waiting for the next victim. Sarah lived in extreme fear. She couldn't sleep soundly, always feeling as if someone was watching her, no matter where she was. That summer vacation had turned into an eternal nightmare, and Sarah would forever be a part of the terrifying story of the pond behind her house. Story 2. The Old House and the Mysterious Pond. It was the summer of 2021. In a quiet suburban area of Oregon, where tall ancient trees cast long shadows and the air always carried a hint of lake dampness. Sarah, a single young artist, had just inherited her great-grandmother's old house, hidden behind overgrown bushes. The house looked ordinary, a bit rundown with peeling paint and creaking doors that groaned with every gust of wind. Especially, behind the house was a large pond, its water murky, eerily still. Sarah was an introverted person, sometimes prone to excessive worry, especially when she was alone. She had moved here to find peace and inspiration for her artwork. But from the very first days, she felt an inexplicable unease. The pond behind the house, though strangely quiet, had a gloomy, unexplainable chill. Occasionally, in the late afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight faded, she would hear faint sounds, very subtle, like ripples on the pond's surface, even though there was no wind. One evening at dusk, as Sarah stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the pond, she suddenly saw a figure. It was a girl, wearing a long white dress, standing half submerged in the water. Her hair was dark, long, soaking wet, almost completely covering her face. Sarah, startled, rubbed her eyes, thinking she had imagined it. But when she looked again, the figure was still there, motionless, staring blankly into the void. Her heart pounded, an icy fear spread throughout her body. She knew it wasn't an illusion. After the night she saw the ghost of the girl in the white dress in the pond, Sarah began to experience strange phenomena more frequently. She could no longer sleep soundly. Horrifying dreams began to torment her every night. She dreamed she was standing in the middle of the pond, cold water enveloping her, and the girl in the white dress with soaking wet hair, dark, lifeless eyes, would slowly approach her, whispering indistinct but haunting words. Occasionally, when she was alone in the living room, she would hear very faint whispers, like someone talking in another room. But when she went to check, everything would be silent. The feeling of being watched clung to her, especially when she was near the window overlooking the pond. She felt an unusual coldness often enveloped the house. Sometimes the temperature would drop suddenly at certain points, as if an invisible cold draft was passing through. Sarah tried to dismiss those thoughts, telling herself that she was overly stressed, or that the old house was causing strange sounds and phenomena. But the figure of the girl in the white dress in the pond, and the indistinct whispers, kept clinging to her mind, making it difficult for her to sleep and always living in unease. The initial signs gradually became clearer and more terrifying. Sarah began to frequently see dark shadows flitting past the corner of her eye, especially when she walked down the dark hallway, or when she was alone in the living room. She would spin around, but there was nothing, just the deafening silence and the old walls. Once, she was making tea in the kitchen, when she suddenly heard a very clear whisper, as if someone was calling her name. "Sarah." She dropped the cup. Her heart pounded like a drum. She looked around. No one was there. Only the wind whistling through the slightly open window. Objects in the house also began to move inexplicably. A comb placed on the dressing table suddenly fell to the floor, for no reason. Sarah stood frozen, looking at the comb lying askew on the floor, and felt a chill run down her spine. She began to sleep very little. The terrifying dreams continued to torment her, becoming clearer and clearer. She clearly saw the face of the girl in the white dress in the pond. Dark, lifeless eyes, and a grotesque, distorted smile, emerging from the pond behind the house, moving straight towards her. Sarah began to doubt herself, and doubt everything she was experiencing. The tension reached its peak when Sarah began to see even more terrifying things. One evening, as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, she suddenly saw a reflection behind her. It was the girl in the white dress from her dreams, with long, soaking wet hair hanging loose, a pale face, and deep, hollow eyes staring at her through the mirror. Sarah screamed in terror, spinning around, but there was nothing. Only the old mirror, reflecting her own pale, terrified face. She rushed out of the bathroom, trembling uncontrollably, her heart racing. She tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just an illusion, due to her exhaustion and stress. But the fear had already taken root in her mind. She began to avoid looking in mirrors, avoiding the dark corners of the house, and trying not to be alone for too long. She turned on all the lights in the house, but the light seemed unable to dispel the invisible darkness that enveloped the house. She felt the house was turning into a trap, and she was stuck inside. The fear prompted Sarah to investigate the history of the house and the pond behind it. She had vaguely heard from neighbors about a tragic story that happened here a long time ago, but no one spoke clearly. She began searching for information, rummaging through old books, old newspaper articles at the local library. Finally, she found an old, yellowed newspaper article, reporting on a mysterious disappearance that occurred in the 1970s. A young girl named Anna Peterson, who lived in this house, had disappeared mysteriously, leaving no trace. The article stated that Anna was a beautiful, gentle girl, but had a tragic fate. She was deceived by a cruel man, and was assaulted. After that, she ran away, and no one ever found her. It was rumored that Anna had died in the pond behind the house, because she always felt haunted by that pond, and had a strange connection to it. Along with that article, Sarah also found an old, rotting journal, discovered beneath the floorboards in the old bedroom of the house. The journal was written in shaky handwriting, but it was clearly Anna's. The last entries in the journal recounted Anna's extreme suffering, her humiliation, and the nights she heard calls from the pond. The calls of something waiting for her. The last page had only one sentence written in trembling handwriting. "I will never leave this place. I will wait for the one who harmed me, forever." As Sarah read that, an icy chill ran down her spine, and she felt as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around and saw a female figure, long, soaking wet hair, a pale face, dark, lifeless eyes, and a grotesque, distorted smile, standing right in the middle of the room, staring directly at her. It was Anna, the spirit of the girl who had died in that pond. Anna said not a word, just slowly approached Sarah, her lifeless eyes never leaving her. Sarah backed away step by step, trying to get out of the room. She felt an icy current pierce through her, as if something was trying to possess her, to enter her. The extreme fear made her lose her reason. She felt Anna's voice echoing in her head. "You will be here too, just like me, forever." Sarah knew that Anna's spirit had been trapped in the pond, and she had found a way to escape, by haunting this house, and seeking a new victim to possess, to avenge her tragic fate. The sounds from the pond, the horrifying dreams, all were signs of Anna's torment. She wanted to drag Sarah down. She wanted her to also become a part of that deadly pond. Sarah tried to resist, but she felt her body no longer obeying her. Anna's ghost lunged at her, and Sarah felt an extreme pain, as if thousands of needles were piercing her body. She saw Anna's reflection in her own eyes, dark, lifeless eyes, and a distorted smile. Sarah screamed in vain, but no sound came out. Just then, a loud crash came from outside the window. A dry branch broke off, falling onto the bedroom window frame. As soon as that sound echoed, Anna's ghost suddenly vanished. Sarah collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. She lay there, her body trembling uncontrollably, her mind blank, but her eyes were still filled with panic. Sarah immediately left that house. She never returned there again, but the haunting still wouldn't release Sarah. Every night, she still heard the ripples from the pond, faint whispers somewhere in the air, and dreams of Anna with soaking wet hair. A pale face, lifeless eyes continued to haunt her. She knew that Anna's spirit was still there, trapped in pain and hatred, waiting for the next victim. Sarah lived in extreme fear. She couldn't sleep soundly, always feeling as if someone was watching her, no matter where she was. That summer had turned into an eternal nightmare, and Sarah would forever be a part of the terrifying story of the pond behind her house. Story 3. The New House and Bucky's Warning. It was the summer of 2023. In a secluded rural area of Vermont, where lush green hills and winding dirt roads led deep into the forest. Chloe, a young single rider, had just moved into an old house she inherited from a distant relative. The house looked ordinary, but was quite rundown with faded paint and creaking doors that groaned with every gust of wind. Behind the house, hidden among dense bushes, was a large pond, its surface eerily still. Chloe was quite sensitive, and prone to excessive worry, especially when she was alone. She moved here to find peace and inspiration for her writing, as well as to escape the pressures of the city. Bucky, her loyal golden retriever, was her only companion. From the very first days, Chloe felt an inexplicable unease from the pond. Bucky, usually very playful, became cautious when approaching it. One evening at dusk, as the last rays of sunlight faded, Chloe took Bucky for a walk around the garden. Bucky suddenly stopped at the pond's edge, barking incessantly towards the water's surface, the fur on its nape bristling. Chloe tried to call Bucky, but it kept barking, its eyes fixed on an undefined spot. Chloe was curious. She turned on her phone's flashlight, shining it towards where Bucky was barking. The light pierced through the dim twilight, and then, she saw it. A face. Only the head. with deep black, pupil-less eyes, floating on the water's surface. Dark, long, soaking wet hair cascaded around that pale face. Chloe froze, unable to move, an overwhelming fear choking her throat. Chloe couldn't believe her eyes. She ran for her life, dragging Bucky, who was barking continuously. She rushed into the house, slammed the door shut, and locked all the bolts. Her heart pounded like a drum. Her breath came in gasps. Her whole body trembled uncontrollably. Bucky still stood next to her, growling softly, his eyes fixed on the window, as if he still saw something out there. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that horrifying face appear in her mind, those black, lifeless eyes staring straight at her. She tossed and turned on the bed, listening to every small sound. The old house seemed to be coming alive as well. She heard floorboards creaking downstairs, the wind whistling through cracks in the doors, and occasionally, very faint ripples from the pond, as if someone was moving underwater. Bucky lay curled up at the foot of Chloe's bed, occasionally whimpering softly, as if he too sensed the unease in the air. Chloe turned on all the lights in the house, but the light seemed unable to dispel the invisible darkness that enveloped the house. She felt an unusual presence, a very clear feeling of being watched. The following days, Chloe lived in extreme tension. She tried to avoid looking at the pond, but it seemed to draw her in. She began to frequently see dark shadows flitting past the corner of her eye, especially when she walked down the dark hallway, or when she was alone in the living room. She would spin around, but there was nothing, just the deafening silence and the old walls. Once, as she was sitting and writing in her study, she suddenly heard a very clear whisper, as if someone was calling her name. "Chloe?" The voice was very soft, but haunting, like the sound of water. She dropped her pen, her heart pounding like a drum. She looked around. No one was there. Only the wind whistling through the slightly open window. Objects in the house also began to move inexplicably. A book placed on the table suddenly fell to the floor, for no reason. Chloe stood frozen, looking at the book lying askew on the floor, and felt a chill run down her spine. She began to sleep very little. The horrifying dreams continued to torment her, becoming clearer and clearer. She clearly saw the face with those black, lifeless eyes, emerging from the pond, moving straight towards her, and she always woke up in a state of extreme fear. The tension reached its peak when Chloe began to see even more terrifying things. One evening, as she stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, she suddenly saw a reflection behind her. It was the face with those black eyes, long, soaking wet dark hair cascading around it, staring at her through the mirror. Chloe screamed in terror, spinning around, but there was nothing. Only the old mirror, reflecting her own pale, terrified face. She rushed out of the bedroom, trembling uncontrollably, her heart racing. She tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just an illusion, due to her exhaustion and stress. But the fear had already taken root in her mind. She began to avoid looking in mirrors, avoiding the dark corners of the house, and trying not to be alone for too long. She turned on all the lights in the house, but the light seemed unable to dispel the invisible darkness that enveloped the house. She felt the house was turning into a trap, and she was stuck inside. The fear prompted Chloe to investigate the history of the house and the pond. She had vaguely heard from neighbors about a tragic story that happened here a long time ago, but no one spoke clearly. She began searching for information, rummaging through old books, old newspaper articles at the local library. Finally, she found an old, yellowed newspaper article, reporting on a mysterious disappearance that occurred in the 1960s. A young girl named Lillian Hayes, who lived in this house, had disappeared mysteriously, leaving no trace. The article stated that Lillian was a beautiful, talented girl, but had a tragic fate. She was deceived by a cruel man and became pregnant. Out of fear and shame, Lillian tried to hide it. One stormy night, she ran away from home, and no one ever found her. It was rumored that Lillian had died in the pond behind the house, perhaps due to an accident, or committed suicide out of despair. Along with that article, Chloe also found an old, rotting journal, discovered beneath the floorboards in the old bedroom of the house. The journal was written in shaky handwriting, but it was clearly Lillian's. The last entries in the journal recounted Lillian's extreme suffering, her loneliness, and the nights she heard calls from the pond. The calls of something waiting for her, where she could find peace, or an end to her pain. The last page had only one sentence written in trembling handwriting: "I will find peace down there, forever." As Chloe read that, an icy chill ran down her spine, and she felt as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, and saw a female figure, long, soaking wet hair, a pale face, dark, lifeless eyes, and a grotesque, distorted smile, standing right in the middle of the room, staring directly at her. It was Lillian, the spirit of the girl who had died in that pond. Lillian said not a word, just slowly approached Chloe, her lifeless eyes never leaving her. Chloe backed away step by step, trying to get out of the room. She felt an icy current pierce through her, as if something was trying to possess her, to enter her. The extreme fear made her lose her reason. She felt Lillian's voice echoing in her head. "You will find peace down there too, just like me, forever." Chloe knew that Lillian's spirit had been trapped in the pond, and she had found a way to escape, by haunting this house, and seeking a new victim to possess, so she would no longer be alone in the coldness of the pond water. Bucky's barking, the horrifying dreams, all were signs of Lillian's torment. She wanted to drag Chloe down. She wanted her to also become a part of that deadly pond. Chloe tried to resist, but she felt her body no longer obeying her. Lillian's ghost lunged at her, and Chloe felt an extreme pain, as if thousands of needles were piercing her body. She saw Lillian's reflection in her own eyes, dark, lifeless eyes, and a distorted smile. Chloe screamed in vain, but no sound came out. Just then, Bucky, Chloe's dog, suddenly rushed forward, barking loudly, and clawing at the air where Lillian's ghost stood. As soon as Bucky touched it, an icy blast of air emanated, and Lillian's ghost suddenly vanished. Chloe collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. She lay there, her body trembling uncontrollably, her mind blank, but her eyes were still filled with panic. Chloe immediately left that house, along with Bucky. She never returned there again, but the haunting still wouldn't release Chloe. Every night, she still heard the ripples from the pond, faint whispers somewhere in the air, and dreams of Lillian with soaking wet hair. A pale face, lifeless eyes continued to haunt her. She knew that Lillian's spirit was still there, trapped in pain and loneliness, waiting for the next victim. Chloe lived in extreme fear. She couldn't sleep soundly, always feeling as if someone was watching her, no matter where she was. That summer that was supposed to be a place to find peace had turned into an eternal nightmare, and Chloe would forever be a part of the terrifying story of the pond near her house.